dahlias are one of the easiest, most high-performing plants you can have in a garden. Many people think you have to lift them in the winter and you have to stake them, which I think puts gardeners off, especially if you haven't got loads of time, but I do neither, and here's how. So I'm in USDA zone 8, so I can get winters down to -12, sometimes we've had -17. Often it's just down to -2 or 3. But these dahlias have been in the ground for many, many years and they look fine, all the better for it. So what I do is in the winter, when they die down in the autumn with the frost, you just remove the dead foliage and then I put on a lovely big duvet of digestate, mulch, compost, anything I've got to hand. And I'll put it about 200 millimeters, that's about 8 inches or so deep. And that just insulates the crown from the complete cold. And it just keeps them frost free and they love it. So that's one pointer. Now, if we here are on very, very free draining soil, and obviously if your soil's got loads of moisture in it, if it's a very wet, poor draining soil, then they will be subject to the cold and they'll feel it more than on a dry soil like mine. When I came, had maybe 50 mil, 2 inches of topsoil in this garden because there wasn't a garden, it was just a crew yard. So it was a farmyard with hardcore and concrete and nasty things like that. And so anything I've put here, I've just added on over the years. And that's the other thing, people say dahlias love rich soil. And sure enough, if I fed my dahlias, and I never give them artificial fertilizers, they just have the mulch in the winter, which I then pull back a bit when they start to grow, so I don't have huge mounds of compost everywhere. But if you do feed your dahlias, then they will grow much bigger. If you water your dahlias, they will grow much bigger. And the bigger they grow, the more they need to be staked. And so I like to grow mine mean and lean. And that way, by not lifting them, you get these nicely established clumps that are much more self-supporting than these tall, overfed, lanky ones if you overfeed and you overwater. Now, this year it has been very different. It was really dry here early on. And then come July and August, we had mammoth rain, so it got really wet. So this year they are actually taller than ever. And sometimes I get caught out by not staking them. And if you read about staking dahlias in books, you can see hundreds of different methods. But what I do is I've just got these little metal hoops, and if come sort of September, October, when the gales come, they start to lean over a bit, I just shove these hoops in at the bottom and sort of push them back. And you don't really see them. And I've got loads of these little metal hoops that are probably about 300 a foot high, and they're very useful for that and for putting fleece on in the vegetable garden and all sorts of things. So if you've got a metal worker or you find some of these, just get a load, because you'll use them for so many different things. Now, the thing that's great about dahlias is really their flower power. They have so much flower potential. They will start flowering, the early varieties, from early July, and they will go on to October. The end of October, you can still see them blooming away. And also they come in just about every colour, apart from, I don't think there's blue. So you can really use them to pep up your garden no end. And here, because I've got quite a few evergreens, I've got topiary, I've got obelisks, I find the dahlias probably contribute most of the colour in the summer. And they even grow quite well in shade. I mean, people say they love full sun, they love lots of moisture. Well, they don't get any of these in positions here. They get partial shade over there and they still flower pretty well. So don't be put off by that either. I think most people can grow dahlias. If I was on very heavy soil, I probably would plant them on slight mounds to increase the drainage. And I might lift some tubers in the winter, more of that later, to make sure they did survive those cold snaps. The other way that you can help make them more self-supporting is when they're just young plants coming out of the ground in spring, and when they've got maybe 3 or 4 pairs of leaves, then I will pinch out the tops, or I'll just cut them back. And that way you make much more branch plants with lots more flowers instead of just one big shoot coming up. And that means they're more self-supporting because they're not quite so tall and they've got more flower power. So that's another great tip. Also, when they start coming out of the ground in spring, well, it'll be late spring, it's probably more like end of May, early June. This year it was very late because it was so cold. then you can get attacked by slugs. So what I do is I put the organic ferric phosphate slug pellets just around the foliage as it comes out. I check and see if they've been eaten, and if they've disappeared, the pellets, then I add a few more, and I watch them on a fairly daily basis. And as soon as the slugs stop coming to eat the pellets, then I can stop putting the slug pellets down. And that just makes sure that you don't get the slug attacks. Deadheading is important too, because the more you deadhead, it stops them going to seed, and then you get more flowers. The more you cut them for the house, the more flowers that will be produced. And we have on Gardener's Question Time had questions about how do you deadhead a dahlia, because it can be quite difficult to see. But basically, when the bud goes pointy, I think actually I've deadheaded all these. We'll move along and see another clump that I've got in my cutting garden, and I'll show you how to deadhead those there. So come and have a look at these. So these are my Bishop of Canterbury. Now this is one of the Bishop series, and they were bred fairly recently, and they've got this quite cut foliage, and they've got lovely dark purple foliage. Now if you look at Bishop of Canterbury in my other garden, you'll see it's about half the height. And the reason this one has grown so tall, and so I have actually popped in a couple of low stakes there and a girdle of twine, is because next door are some beans. Now these are my later runner beans that I sowed probably in July. They're my second cropping that are just starting to bean up now. And because it was so dry when I planted them out, I gave them oodles of water. And so because water moves sideways in the soil, Bishop of Canterbury really benefited from that, and that's why they've grown so massive. But on to deadheading. So when people get confused is because you can see a little bud, let me find a little bud that's going to flower, is this one. Now you see that's a more rounded bud. I don't know if you can see that. But these ones that look pointy are ones that are they've flowered, and I want to cut them off because I don't want them to spend energy producing seeds, and I want them to produce more flowers. And I will go back to a pair of leaves because I don't want a load of spikes sticking up like that. So all these little ones I'll just cut back to the next pair of leaves. But it's not, you know, you don't have to be too crucial about it, but it's just nicer if you do go back to a leaf. But you see the amount of flowers these are produced, it is just amazing. And I have to say, I really like this as a cut flower, the Bishop of Canterbury. I did some trials putting them in water, and I cut this one, and it lasted for a good 7 days in water, which I think is good for a dahlia. And there's never any shortage of flowers to cut with this one, or any of them, to be honest. And what I did is I just cut them, I quickly seared the ends in boiling water for a couple of seconds, then I put a drop of bleach into the water and a little bit of sugar solution that I made up, so they've got energy, the bleach kills any rots that are coming, and they lasted pretty well. The other dahlia we were talking about before, talking by, is Thomas Eddison, and I love that dahlia. It is my favourite dahlia, and it's named after Thomas Eddison, who was a really bright spark. He developed the light bulb. He also found out how to record sound, and he had over 1,000 patents, which he himself registered. So he was a big brain guy. And so I think it's lovely to remember someone so special by such a wonderful dahlia. And there are so many. Now I'm going to plant out a load more dahlias next year because I'm going to remove my mature quince trees, and I'll talk about that in another video. And so I'm going to put some other trees in which won't be casting so much shade because they're nothing like the size. And so I'm going to have a lot more sunlight, so I'm going to plant a load more dahlias. And I buy my dahlias from GT Bulbs, and they usually put up the list of what they've got in late winter, early spring, and then I buy them as tubers. And they're a wholesaler, and in the past they have got me dahlias which are not on their list, so they are really helpful. They got me the Thomas Eddison. And because they're wholesalers, they will also smell quite small quantities, but they are very good value and very good plants. So therefore, all the different dahlias. You'll also love looking through the catalogues. You'll get confused because there's so many different types, like the pom-pom dahlias. And these single ones are really nice because obviously they're good for insects. They can work the flowers and they're often covered in bees. But really don't be confused by all the different types. Just try any that you think are fabulous and you'll be spoilt for choice, and just go for what you love. And in my cutting garden, I just grow them with whatever, but in my main garden out in the courtyard, I grow them next to lots of things like Canna iridiflora, which is the hardy canna with the lovely dark scarlet flowers. I grow them with the Salvia, Cerro Potosi. So there's a lot of colour all summer long in that garden. And in the winter, then I've got a lot of structure. So I've got the low hedges along the front, which also help keep the dahlias up and stops them tipping over. And then I've got topiary, I've got obelisk, and I've got the little trees or the big trees. So therefore there's a lot of structure which really works well with that real hit of fantastic colour. So if you're interested in how to pot up tubers when you buy them and how to take cuttings from them, you can see the next part of the video, which I recorded over 20 years ago on dahlias. I hope you like it, and I hope you really try experimenting with dahlias. I just wanted to add a final zap of colour to the courtyard, and I've decided to go for dahlias, partly because they give me colour all summer long right through to the frost, and partly because they're fun and simple to propagate. These cuttings, for instance, I took just 5 or 6 weeks ago. The most common way that you buy dahlias are tubers, and they're usually delivered mail order mid to late spring. And here's one that's just arrived, and you can see they're already started to shoot. What I'm going to do is put them in the pot. Now, if they haven't started to sprout, some people aren't sure which way out to put them, but these are the dead stem that you've cut away from last year, and you see they actually shoot from the bottom of the stems. So you want to plant the entire tuber. You don't want to split it up because you don't know which ones are going to sprout and which ones aren't. So I put the whole thing in the pot, and then I just put potting compost around it. I'm now going to put this in my greenhouse, and it will quickly start to shoot like these. These are ones which I lifted actually from my own garden, and I lifted them up as soon as the frost had just started to blacken the foliage, and then I turned it upside down, having cut the foliage off, and that meant that all the bits of water dropped out of those big stalks, and so it sort of dried off a little bit, and so it didn't tend to rot. And then I just stored them over winter in pretty much dry compost, and about 2 or 3 weeks ago they suddenly started to shoot into growth with the new weather. And I will actually plant this out in my garden at the end of May, beginning of June, and then I know it'll be safe from the frosts. If you don't actually want to buy the tubers like that, you can buy the rooting cuttings, and they come nice little packs through the post, and these are obviously less expensive. Here's one exactly the same variety as that of the tuber, which is Arabian Night, a lovely dark one. And this one, nice little rooted plant. I'm just going to pop it up again on a slightly smaller pot, and I'm going to put it in ordinary all-purpose potting compost. And you actually leave it in those funny little pots that they come in. You don't want to actually disturb the root ball and take that little net bag off from around the end. You actually leave it in and just pop it in like that. With my own tubers here, which has started into growth, if I wanted to take lots and lots of this lovely dahlia, and this is a great dahlia, it's called the Bishop of Llandaff, and the reason I think it's so popular is because it's got this lovely dark purpley greeny foliage. It will actually become purple in this, but because it's been in my greenhouse, you see, it hasn't had such intense light on the leaves, and it's that bright sunlight that makes this very dark purple coloration. And I want to propagate up some more. I can never have enough of this, and so I'm going to do it from cuttings. And so what you want to do to take a cutting is you just cut it as low down on the plant as you can, preferably below, just below a node, with a sharp knife like that. There it is. And then I just pull off these outer leaves there, and that's quite a nice size for a cutting. And I'm going to pop it into this mixture. Now this, with all cuttings, I tend to take pretty much the same mixture. I have 50% grit and 50% ordinary potting compost like this. Mix them up, put them in, have them quite nice and damp. And I don't usually bother with rooting hormone, but with dahlias I do, because it does have a fungicide element in it. And I find because it's such soft new growth, it can actually be quite subjected to fungal disease. So I just dip the end in the rooting powder, and then you just make a small hole with a finger or pencil and just put it in. And I'll go and put them in a nice shady corner of the greenhouse to start with for the first few days. If it's really hot and they look a bit as though they're going to wilt, then I'll just encase it all in a polythene bag, and that really makes a very nice close environment. If it's not like that, you needn't worry, you can just put it in like that. And in a few weeks, you'll have lovely new roots. And these cuttings, believe it or not, will flower this year. So I'll plant them out at the end of May. And if I put a few of them together, I have a lovely colourful group, and those flowers will start July or August, and they'll go right on through the summer until they're hit by the frost. What could be better value?